Hey now, welcome to the Dirty Side of the Track, America's leading Formula One podcast. That's Rob, I'm Brian. It is still the off season, but we've got a great kind of show here for you, some conversation. You're going to love it. Rob, how are you, brother?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks, Brian. Yeah, when we were kind of deciding what we wanted to do this week, we were kind of like, what did we do in off seasons before? And we kind of went through and we went all the way back to our very first one where we hadn't even covered a race yet because we decided to launch in off season. So we had like 3 months of content to try to come up with, which is really stupid in hindsight. Anyway, we did a kind of like a beginner's guide, or as we called F1 crash course, which maybe not the best choice of names, but never mind. Um, Kind of beginner's guide to F1. So if you're new to the sport, or if there's just some things that maybe you've watched it and didn't realize, we kind of got like a uh, look at kind of F1 as a whole, format of race weekends, looking at tires and pit stop strategies. So Brian will dine out in there for hours. A
Yeah.
look at flags, an F1 glossary for all these terms that you may hear and not understand what they're all about. Before finally taking a wander down, what have we got ahead of us in terms of the team lineups, drivers, and all that kind of jazz? Really, that'll
Yeah,
be that.
and we will bring some listeners on for the quiz and DRS. Rob was on the road this week, so Rob, thank you for finding time to help put this together. But we will get that set. It was just a week where we knew we didn't have time to do a ton of prep. So awesome! I'm so excited. I loved this the first time 3 years ago. You're right. If you go back in time to like episode 4. We were not real good at this whole podcasting thing. Not
and,
like
and,
we're
and
great
if
now, but
no, I know,
the
and a
bar was very
slight
low then, and it's anyway.
and a slight confession, we kind of agreed to do a kind of a beginner's guide to F1 because we thought if we're going to start talking about this every week, we kind of need to sound like we know what we're talking about. So it was as much to brush our knowledge back up again before we started that 2022 season. But okay, not a lot in news and video this week, so we'll be able to get quickly to the content. So, I know while I was on the road, I was kind of in airports and stuff. I was keep going to my normal is go to for any kind of big story that I think is credible. I hit BBC Sport first because they don't tend to break stuff until it's true. That page was identical to what it was last week. Nothing,
There are people getting
nothing.
paid over there to do zero.
So
The
I went off
F1
and
desk
yeah,
is just
the F1
crickets.
desk is taking time off. So I went and trawled a few of the other sites that I use, and we really didn't have a lot this week. We had Ferrari dropped a cryptic Instagram post, which was kind of like this double picture on Instagram of like a view of a garage with a driver sat on a box and a car there, and all this clutter around it. And they were like, I can't remember what the tagline was. It was like "Look harder" or something. So everybody went off into, oh, what is it? What's the hidden message? Oh, there's two dog bowls. Is it about the two dogs that are finally going to meet? We're going to get the reveal of the dogs meeting each other. Was it Leo and Roscoe? Have I got that
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yep. And then someone, I think it's Terry from the Coffee Corner, said, actually, assume this was done on purpose, but there are 16 tires and 44 windows in this shot. So
No,
they're
I
doing
didn't
the
see Terry notice
1640.
that. Nice
They're doing
job.
1644 again. I said, okay, fine. And then Ferrari dropped the actual answer in their story. I just stuck with the windows and tires one because what they did was they highlighted, like, if you looked at the background props, you could kind of draw a 16 and a 44 in them, but it was a bit like those magic eye pictures of the 90s where you had to go cross eyed and try to see if you could see a 3D object.
As somebody who has a mild case of color blindness, where when they show you those bubble charts, as well, and like they're different colors, but you're supposed to see numbers in them, and some of them I don't see a thing. That was this. And I know I saw the answer, and I'm like, I'm dumber for having spent 40 seconds looking at this now. And they had to highlight it, and it actually was so bad it made it to the Formula Dank Reddit user community because it was so stupid. It made it over there
Oh.
unedited. And they're like, oh, this was real?
Well, when I saw the highlighting thing, I thought, oh, that's just somebody having a laugh. That's not really what it is. And then somebody went, no, 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 this is on the Ferrari page. They've posted the
I
answer. I was like,
So
oh
dumb.
my gosh.
That's where we are in the off season. We are in the
Oh,
so dumb aspect of the off season.
yeah. And then if we had, there were some rumors swirling around that Audi weren't really all in, and they were maybe looking for an exit strategy, and they weren't going to come to F1 in 26. Well, I think that's pretty much got shut down now because this week they formally completed their takeover of Sauber. So I think if you're looking for ways out, one of the things you don't do is finish off formally taking over the team.
Yep.
I guess.
Nope. And then the last thing that we saw, Sergio said he's still in a daze and it's too soon to plan his next career move as he was caught unaware at the end of the season and did not expect to be dropped. So I feel sorry for him that he felt that way. I'm assuming Christian Horner told him everything was fine and then Helmut Marko walked in and fired him. I'm just guessing that's the dynamic at play in Red Bull, especially given my understanding of who liked hiring him and didn't. However, that said, after he got dropped, his dad did have a post, I think on Instagram, and he said he'll be back stronger than ever and taking everybody by storm, or something like that. I'm going off memory at this point. And I'm thinking, will he? Yeah. I would love to see that. Checo was an amazing driver in F1, and for many of those years, he punched above his weight at low teams, midfield teams, always at the top of the midfield and dragging that car around, whether it was, Force India or wherever. And so I just, I guess we'll see. But with that, it is time for the Video Vault, and you're going to notice a slight change to the Video Vault this week. Let's open that puppy. And normally, as the door opens and we enter the vault, it's me talking. However, I'm going to be quiet now.
Yeah, because you didn't find anything this week, and I didn't find anything all week until yesterday. So we're recording this on Sunday, and on Saturday, I took my daughter to a swim meet, and I love watching my daughter swim. What I can't stand is the hours of nothingness in between each event. So I spent a lot of time on the internet and on YouTube, and just before the end, I saw one that F1 had dropped. They either dropped it yesterday or the day before. So it's Formula One channel, and it's called Formula One's Funniest Moments of 2024. It's good. It's nice to be reminded of the sort of, high octane side of F1. This is just few clips of various different drivers, things that happened, team radio messages, them messing around in interviews with the media and stuff. It's just a good watch. The only thing you have to do, unless you're a huge fan of cheesy jazz music, is you need to just try to block out this kind of. I don't know who picked it in the F1 media center. They was like, yeah, this one with the saxophone that keeps coming in really loud all the time. People will love. Oh yeah, we'll just watch it. Maybe I'm being old and miserable, but I liked the content. I wasn't a fan of the jazz music, but that's all I found. But at least we have one entry in the vault this week.
How did Rob do?
Pretty good.
I'll take pretty good.
Closing the door on it. Good job, Rob.
Okay, so now to the meat of the episode, the meat of the sandwich, our F1 Crash Course 2025 edition. So, again, some of you will already know all of this, but if you're new to the sport and getting yourself ready for this season, yes, Brian?
And if you do know all of this, and we mess up, feel free to send us notes, because you guys do a pretty good job letting us know when we hose up various things. Oh, yeah. So I look forward to hearing what we screwed up. I'm dead serious on this one, because I'm going to blame it all on Rob. So whether it's 100%. On Blue Sky or Threads or Twitter or Insta or just on our website, email us, Discord. Tell us what of course, please, the Discord, tell us what we hosed up, and I will blame Rob for the entire thing.
There is a good chance that because I recycled the 2022 material, that I didn't update all of it to 2025. So keep your ears open, because there might be some outtakes in here. Right, okay, so let's start right at the beginning. Just level set, right? Open cockpit, open wheel, single seater.
It's not unicycle.
Highest class of racing. No, not a unicycle. Highest class of racing that falls under the FIA. And it's been around since 1950, and that's one part we're not going to dive into. We've done Vale's Tales. There's loads of stuff you can go and research if you want to look at the history of Formula One. But yeah, essentially, race season contains multiple races referred to as Grand Prix, and they take place all around the world.
And what's fascinating and fun is, as it takes place all around the world, the number of races every season changes. If you look at it sort of on a scale from 50 to now, 1950 to now, it's increasing every year, but it's not necessarily every year over year larger. We will see 24 Grand Prix in 2025, but it has flexed a lot. We've had tracks come on and off the calendar. We're not doing a calendar review today, as Rob already said. But we've had just some wild and amazing seasons throughout all of those years. And we've had 34 drivers who've won the title, with Max being the latest to add his name to the list. He has 4. If you look at the top ranking winners of the championship, the World Drivers' Championship, Lewis Hamilton, Michael Schumacher are tied with 7 apiece. If you wanted to know, our actual first episode was after Abu Dhabi 2021, at which point Lewis almost had his eighth. If you want to stir up a pot with F1 fans, ask them their thoughts on that race. That is literally the best flashpoint in the last 10 years. I'm not doing that now. So they both have 7, Lewis and Michael. Juan Manuel Fangio with 5. He won all of his in the 50s, but he did not win the inaugural season. And then,
it's crazy, that one. Sorry, before you go on to the next one, I always find that one fascinating, that all those years that have gone by, and second in the standings is still Fangio on 5.
I mean, you could get into a debate that said those early seasons with few races, 8 races or so at times that counted, and there was less there was less talent around him. And yes, you could talk about Ascari and his great seasons early on, and you could talk about just Farina and winning in 50 and all the. But he was a great driver in a good car.
But also in an era where, say good car, cars that weren't exactly known for their reliability.
No.
So
they looked like tubs. If you go back, we used to post videos of these when we found them. They looked like a bathtub with wheels. There was a lap belt. That was it, and a leather helmet,
a cloth cap.
Yeah, good luck. Good luck with all that. Anyway, on 4, we just mentioned, obviously, Max Verstappen having 4 titles, winning his 4th last year, 2024. Congratulations to Max. Sebastian Vettel, who also won at Red Bull and also won 4 in a row like Max did, just for the parallel. And then Alain Prost, who won in the 90s? Did he get any in the 80s?
I think. Was the 80s or 90s? I'm not sure. We did a Vale's Tale on Prost, didn't we?
We did do a Vale's Tale on Alain Prost.
So we should go and listen to our own episode.
And
being as we are America's #1 Formula One podcast, we have to mention the American entrance. The US has had 2 champions down the years. They had Phil Hill in 61 and a certain Mario Andretti in 1978. Like Brian said, circuits and champions have changed down the years, but also the engine designs have changed. We're not going to go into everything, but if you kind of look at the last 25 years or so, especially because you'll hear this as kind of people mentioning different eras. From 96 to 2006, it's the 3-litre V10s that everyone pines for the V10s, and Brian's probably got a clip of a V10 somewhere that he's going to play in a bit. 2006, they changed over to 2.4-litre naturally aspirated V8 engines, which sounded pretty sweet. And then the one you'll get referred to as you'll hear the turbo hybrid era, which Mercedes had dominated. It was 2014. They went to turbocharged 1.6-litre V6 engines, and they don't sound quite as nice. But they still, especially when you're there in person. I was going to say, when we were in Canada, sound amazing in person, but something about those older engines, right?
And great point on the sound. And I will play the V10 here in a second. I want to highlight something you just said. And a listener asked me about this recently. Thank you very much, about going to a track. And I kind of shared a lot of notes over Twitter. It was a great question because I brought a bunch of earplugs for our time in Canada, and we didn't need them. And we were pretty close to the track. So it's a fascinating thing that it's not as loud as it used to be. It sounds great. It doesn't sound bad or anything. I'm not going to say that. But when you could listen to something like this, high revving, 19,000 RPMs. Here it goes right now.
Your face every time you play this.
Oh, that's so
you
great.
You need to calm down.
That is not the sound of Formula One anymore. That is the V10 era. So we missed that. And Rob, before you answer on the one last thing, sorry, on the champions, we forgot. We actually have had a world champion on this pokey little podcast. If you wanted to check it out,
this is Jacques Villeneuve, and you're listening to the dirty side of the track.
1997 F1 World Drivers Champion on the dirty side of the track. So feel free to check that out on our website, www.dirtysideofthetrack.com. Special guests. Back to you.
And then regulations, the other thing, as well as engines that have changed like a gazillion times. So we're not even going to try to go through all of those. Just Google image Formula One cars down the years, and you can, without even being like an aerodynamist, you can look at those things and go, wow, they're ridiculously different. Last big change was 2022 when the cars became more reliant on ground effect because they wanted to try to solve this whole cars couldn't get close to the car in front because of the dirty air coming off them. So they were like, yeah, let's do ground effect instead. And I personally think it's worked. We saw a little bit of a drop off as teams kind of figured it out. In the 2022 season, it was amazingly close racing all the time. And then naturally things kind of, engineers get clever and change things. And 2026 is the next big rule shake-up. So this is the last year of these current regs. And at some point, we'll do an episode on what's changing in 2026.
And when they went back to ground effect, you saw some cars in 2022 take off like a rocket ship. It's easy and probably intentioned but uninformed to say that Red Bull succeeded so strongly because they had Adrian Newey designing their cars, and he'd been around for the last real big ground effect era. However, their correlation did work, and Red Bull did great. And some cars had a lot of trouble, and if we'll get to bottoming out a little later, but I'm going to preview it because when we went to 2022, some cars were hitting the ground a lot, and it was called porpoising, and it sounded like this. Oh wait, that's not the right sound effect.
I knew you were building up to that sound effect.
Yeah.
Come in. Okay, so
all right, moving.
What does a race weekend look like? So Brian said we've got 24 races in 2025, and they'll all follow the same kind of high-level format of free practice, qualifying, and the race. Although I say high level because we also have to throw the sprint weekends in there. So do you want to take us through the traditional weekend format, Brian?
Yeah, and we actually once fixed an F1 weekend, if you go back. That was an early one for us too. But it starts with free practice, and you get 2 sessions of an hour each on Friday, and then one Saturday morning. These are all obviously local track times, and there are some that vary, like Las Vegas, but we'll give you the sort of standard vanilla weekend. You have 2 FP sessions, FP1, FP2 on Friday, and then one Saturday morning. And then what happens is people like us who are big fans and big nerds read way too much into FP1, 2, and 3. And some people say, at the end of FP2, because it's the same time as the quali in the race, that's the one when they do the runs that count. And then some people say FP3, because you keep tuning the car before you get to qualifying, which comes next, which I'll explain in a second, is the one that matters. And what ends up happening is you start arguing over practice.
But we talking about practice, man. What are we talking about? Practice?
Exactly. And that's where Rob and I always find ourselves trading notes. Oh, the Ferraris look good in FP2. And then it turns out into nothing. So then qualifying is the second session on Saturday. There are 3 phases of qualifying. There are 20 cars, and there will be 20 cars in 2025. 2 drivers for 10 teams. And what happens is after the first quali session, the slowest 5 times, the slowest 5 drivers drop out of Q1. You move to Q2, and at that point you have 15 cars on track. Same kind of thing. You have a set amount of time to put your fastest lap in. And then the last 5 of those 15 are dropped. And then you go to Q3 where the top 10 shoot out for the pole. And what's important to remember is where you finish in 16 to 20 and then 11 to 15. Those are your starting grid positions. But as you keep moving forward, it's as far as you go. So you could be first in Q1, but that doesn't give you the pole. Pole comes in the 3rd session, Q3. That's what determines the race for Sunday's, the order for Sunday's race.
And then if you look at the sprint format, which I'm not even going to go down to all the differences, it was introduced a few years ago and they keep tinkering with it because they basically added it in, I think, to try to give more value for money to ticket holders, to try to give something competitive on the Friday and the Saturday.
I hated it at first.
You really hated it.
I like it now.
On you. Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's grown on you a little bit now. And I do like the way they've changed it. So the format for 2025 is quali for the sprint is on Friday, meaning we just get 1 practice session. So right now, you've got to nail it in that practice session. If you go and bin it and crash out in free practice 1 after a couple of laps, your engineers are getting nothing in terms of understanding how the car behaves. So sprint quali is kind of shortened version of, the traditional quali that Brian just spoken about. So we get sprint quali 1, 2, 3. I think it lasts 12 minutes, 10 minutes, and 8 minutes. And same deal, 5 knocked out in each session. And that then sets the order for the sprint event, which I prefer. Back in the day when they first introduced it, it was the result of the sprint set the quali for the main race, the grid for the main race, which was awful. I hated that one. So now the 2 things are kind of they're completely separate little competitions. So sprint quali sets the order for the sprint race. Sprint race is. What is it? Is it about 30%? Is it about third race distance?
Yeah, third race distance. I think that's right.
Yeah, something like that. And that happens on Saturday before the quali for the Sunday's Grand Prix. So essentially, you get all of the sprint out the way before everyone's attention moves over to the main event. Winner of the sprint gets 8 points, and then it goes 7, 6, 5, 4, all the way down to 8th, who gets a single point. And this year we will be rocking up for sprint races in Belgium, China, Miami, Austin, Brazil, and Qatar.
So, just as an aside, real fast, they've played with a number of sprints. I think we started with 3. I did not like it at first. However, it's grown enough on me where it's a separate event, so it doesn't contaminate the real race, if you will, and it allows quali to happen. We'll talk about another term later, parc fermé, which is when you can work on changing the real settings of the car outside of maybe a turn of wing and some biases. You can actually make changes. And now after sprint, you can still make, they open parc fermé, you can make those changes before the race. That is a positive for teams that are struggling and learning, being able to kind of learn through the weekend as you would with practice. Now, these tracks that you mentioned, I'm not excited for Qatar for the sprint. It's not a great racetrack to start with, so the sprint will probably be dull and boring as well, which is just not exciting for me because there's a jeopardy that if you ruin your car in a race where now there are points, you're screwed for the quali for the real race where there are more points available. So people, it's not always all out racing in the sprint. It is, but it's not. And you got to be careful. It's a bigger risk reward.
It does feel like everyone goes a little bit more gentle. They may really go for it in the first couple of corners because that's where a lot of the positions will shake out. And then it does feel like a lot of sprints then just lock and load for the remaining. Everyone just wants to bring it home, keep the car well. They almost treat it feels, like an FP3 because they're going to learn about the performance of the car over the rest of the sprint race. And that's a little bit unfair on sprints. We have had some classic sprint races, but like Brian said, it just seems to change so wildly from track to track. And we've had a discussion a few times. We can't really seem to pinpoint what makes track a good sprint event.
So I'm excited for the sprint in Brazil. I'm excited for the sprint at Circuit of the Americas.
Last one's a stinker, didn't we?
Yeah, the weather. The weather was hosed it all up. Brazil, Austin, it's called Circuit of the Americas, COTA for short, usually delivers a good one. I am really excited for China. I love that track. It's really growing on me, man. And so I can't wait to see that track with these cars. And then Spa, Belgium, is a historic track, but I don't know if we've gotten a good race there recently. I'm kind of curious. George extending his fuel was nice, but anyway, I guess we'll see.
So when we get then to the main event on the Sunday, like Brian said, the starting grid is determined by quali, unless we've got some penalties thrown along the way where some people change engine parts and pieces. So we normally get the grid in the quali order unless we've got some penalties thrown in. During the race, no refueling. That stopped many years ago now. But as we'll get into later, pit stops happen to change tyres, and it's a big deal. Pit stop strategy is a big deal, but we'll cover that in the next section. And the points go for the top 10 drivers. It's been set for a while now. It's 25, 18, 15, 12, 10, 8, 6, 4, 2, 1. But we've lost the fastest lap point this year, I believe.
We did. I think you're right. It's fascinating, right? It's kind of an odd thing. The 50s, the entirety of the decade, had a point for the fastest lap. The 50s, and then none. And then they brought it back in 2018 or 19, I think 19. And so we saw it for 5 or 6 years until the end of 24. And if anyone wants to point to where it was killed, it was when Daniel Ricciardo, in the sister team to Red Bull, driving for, I'm trying to get the name.
Toro
He's
Rosso.
the Cash App. Minardi, Toro Rosso, AlphaTauri. For the Racing Bulls. RB, he went for the fastest lap at the very end of the race, took the point away from Red Bull's rival McLaren and Max Verstappen's rival Lando Norris, and everyone was up in arms. And then all of a sudden they're like, "Oh yeah, there's no fastest lap next year." What? Okay.
It's always been a little bit of a random thing. Like
it
all
is.
the arguments of people that didn't like the point for the fastest lap saying, but there's loads of things that are the fastest that you could also give a point. Fastest pit stop. Why doesn't pole get a point? So I think all this stuff was coming in as like, what should we be giving out? And they went, fine, we're taking it away. It's gone.
Could you imagine if they made a point for fastest driver error to cause a disqualification? Lance Stroll would have 24 points at the end of the year.
And when we talk about points,
I found that funnier than I thought I'd like it. Sorry.
What's the point of points? Well, it's to decide the two championships that we have. So points are totaled by driver to determine the World Drivers' Champion, and then team members collate their points together to take the Constructors' title or the World Constructors' title, or the WCC. The WCC is the one that the kind of the teams care about a little bit more because they get prize money for where they finish. So champions get the most all the way down to the end. But in a little kind of way to try to kind of level the playing field, what they do is then flip the order of the world championships. That the team that finishes bottom, so looking at you, Sauber, get the most wind tunnel time for development for next year. So to try to help the ones who are lagging at the back kind of catch up a little bit.
I love that.
I kind of like that.
I really do like that, and we'll talk about the cost cap in a little bit. Between having a cost cap on where teams can spend money, and it's not across everything they spend it on. There's certain restrictions and certain things counted, but basically the car. And so they have this cost cap on the car. And if that is supposed to provide some level of parity, and I mean with a T, not a D, in case Sean Kelly's listening again, that's just the way I pronounce the word. It's not a joke. It's for leveling the playing field. If that's one, then the second is the idea of the worst team gets the most wind tunnel time. I love that too. I think that's a great way to do it. But the winning, the higher you finish up the World Constructors, you get $10 million more every position up you go, and that is a big difference, especially from 10th to first.
Yep. Right, so now's the bit where maybe I might just go and set my alarm and have a little snooze for a few minutes. No, I'm joking, Brian. We're going to talk about tyres and pit stop strategy. So we're going to go to our resident tyre expert and go to the Sat Man for tyres.
Tires are so great. You can spell them with an I or with a Y, and I'll still love you because tires rock. Pirelli is the tire supplier for all F1 teams. They all get the same tires and the same allocation of tires throughout the weekend, so it's how you want to use them. They can choose how they're going to do this, but it's just kind of like, easier for them to start off with the same amount. In the dry, and we'll get into, I'm sure one of us will get on a little soapbox about the wet weather tires, but wait, hold on for that for a second. You get 3 compounds at every race: the hard tire, the medium tire, and the soft tire, and you get a certain amount of each of those. The hard tire has a white stripe on it. So when you're watching a race and you see a car go by with a white stripe on the tire, that's the hard tire. The medium has a yellow stripe, and the soft has a red stripe. And that's how you know the difference. They're all slick tires, so they're bold. There's no tread pattern whatsoever. The most contact with the road. That is what they want. Tread doesn't allow that. That's why slicks are what they want. This part's a little confusing, but stick with me for a second. There are actually 5 compounds in the Pirelli range, as David Crofty calls it. And so they choose Pirelli with Formula One, but Pirelli makes the decision which of the 3 they're going to bring to the race. And then they paint the stripes on the tires because one week, the hardest compound, the C1, you may have the C1, the C2, the C3. You could have the hardest tire in the whole range is the 1. The softest is a C5. Just so it goes C1, C2, C3, C4, C5. They bring 3 of those. And the hardest one is the hard tire painted white. The medium one is the medium tire painted yellow. The softest one's the softest tire painted red, regardless of which of the C's they are. And so they'll bring it out. And you could have, at one race, C1, C2, C3. The C3 would be the soft red tire because it's the softest of those 3. Then you could go to a completely different track, and you could have the C3, the C4, and the C5. But this time the C3 is painted white because it's the hardest of the 3 tires they bring to the track. So it's all about the relativity of those 3 tires and where they selected them from the range. You may ask the question, do they have to go in order? The answer is no, because about a year and a half ago, they brought them out of order to one race, and I freaked out. And I was trying to figure out how often they do that, and I could not find an answer, because sometimes you get to the end of the internet, and I had that week. One last thing on the tires, and then I'll let Rob chime in, but it actually matters greatly in terms of what tires you choose, what track you're at, what kind of tire degradation you'll see. It matters greatly in terms of how you set your strategy. You have to use 2 different compounds in a race. You have to use 2 different compounds in a race. You cannot just go from medium to medium if that's the best tire. You have to get a hard or a soft in there if you started on the medium. And so that strategy Finding when and how and where and how far into the stint you want to go. Is it faster to go for 2 pit stops maybe because the tires are degrading so fast and the fresh tires are better? There's so much that goes into this. But what you want to end up doing is reminding yourself that the car will be lighter towards the end of the race with less fuel. The deg on the same tire should be less. And you want to make sure you're accounting for that, plus temperature, if the sun is going to be out or not. It is incredibly complex as teams set their strategy.
Yeah, and just to finish off the dry tires, if there's anybody out there going, but what's the difference? What's the difference between soft, medium, and hard? Then soft tend to be the fastest. They're the grippiest, but because they're the grippiest, I don't know. I'm not a rubber scientist, but
I just
they
play
degrade
one on
much.
TV.
They degrade much quicker. So you can come out and put some stonking fast laps in, but they are not in the main going to make it to the end of a race. If you were allowed to run on one compound, you ain't running softs all the way through. Hards are, you'll have heard us refer to them as bricks sometimes when they come out and they just have no grip for a while because they are hard and it takes a while for them to heat up and get into the zone, but they're going to go much further. So you're going to sacrifice a bit of lap time, but you're going to be out on them longer, and the medium sits in the middle between the two. And it's just bizarre how some tracks, like you said, Brian, like the medium is the tire to be on, or in another track, it's the hard is the tire to be on. It's just, I bust your chops for liking tires so much, but they are a key part of Formula One. I just, I'd have to admit it. And then we get the wet weather. So sometimes in F1 it rains, and they bring 2 sets along to those. So you get the Inters, or the intermediate tires, which are painted green stripe. And then the Noahs are blue stripe full wets. Basically, they have tread on them, and they vary massively. If you look at a close-up of the Intervers versus the full wets, the full wets are just like
Road tires.
full-on road tires
Yeah,
that you have
exactly.
on your car. Yeah. We don't really see the full wets anymore, because one of the maybe unintended consequences of moving to the ground effect cars is that they just seem to spray up so much more water. The plume behind them seems to be so much bigger than it used to be, because the ground effect cars are trying to spray it. I think the way they've done it is now up and away, so whatever it was.
So they can follow
Anyway,
closer. You're not
so
in the train of dirty air as much.
yeah, but because that now is spraying it up and wide, you get this huge sort of peacock tail of water, which just means it's just not safe. So when a racetrack gets so wet that the blue tires are needed, it usually coincides that they've hit the tipping point of going, it's not safe to race. So
Yeah,
poor
well
old blue
said.
tires, we just haven't really seen very often.
I think
They get taken along to races and never really used.
Yeah, you rarely see racing on blue tires for a long period of time in the full wets. Rob's right. One thing I don't think are going to talk about here is the increase in safety in Formula One. Over the years, we've had fatalities in F1, F2, and all the other junior categories. And what F1 has really done a good job of is trying to make the racing safer. And so one of those, there's many areas. We could talk about the halo. We could talk about all kinds of parts of the car, talk about the barriers, the track. There's so many good things, good things that we've watched them save drivers' lives in the last few years. Love it.
Yeah. 100%.
Unfortunately, you don't get a lot of wet racing because of it as well. We want to be safe. If you can't see in front of you, it's not just the ground effect. Japan.
Was it Japan a couple of years ago? Oh, especially when they had the tractor out on the course as
Carlos
well.
went by the tractor right there.
Carlos, was it? Oh my gosh.
Gosh.
But that would be a good situation to put some flags out, which takes us nicely into our next section. So, flags. There are loads of them in F1, and they've all got a special meaning. And I know people probably know most of them. So let's just whip through these. We have the yellow flag. You get 3 flavors of stationary yellow, which is danger near track, a waved single, danger on track, and then the double bubble, like Deadpool with his 2 swords, double waved yellows, block track.
Be prepared to stop.
All 3 of them do the same thing. You can't overtake in the zone the flag is being waved in. I think you actually need to lift off as well, which is what the whole thing with Lando and Max last year, right?
Yep,
Lando
Qatar.
didn't lift.
Yep. Well, that was a double. I think on doubles you have to lift.
Is it double you have to lift? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep, and be prepared to stop. So so most of these are very common. The green flag, everything is great. Normal racing is resumed or started. Here's what we're doing. We're fine. I love when they start the race when all the cars get into their pit box, there's always a guy or a gal running across the back right in front of the medical car, which follows the race around the first lap, waving a green flag. I want to be that marshal. I want that job so badly.
They look like they're having so much fun.
Yes.
It's like, right, in a minute, get ready. You're going to sprint across the back of the grid as fast as you can. I want you to wave that flag nice and high so everybody can see it. And everyone nails it. You never see like a lackadaisical green flag waver just kind of strolling across in the background going, yeah, come on.
Have you ever seen anyone fall
good.
down? That would be me. At the Miami Grand Prix, they'll have me running across the back of the track and I'll trip and fall. Get run over by a medical car.
Then we have a yellow and red stripe, which we don't really see very often.
Never. I don't even think I've ever seen this.
The slippery track due to oil or, well, it says oil, but the definition said water, but I'm not sure. I think it's just more oil on track that you get that bad boy out for. You get the blue flag, which is waved at cars that are about to get lapped. It really means get ready to move out the way, slow coach, because there's somebody faster coming around behind you. And if you ignore 3 wave blue flags in a row, you get a penalty.
And they do there's placards or digital displays on the side of the track, and it'll put a blue sign.
And on the steering wheel, I think.
It does come on the steering wheel as well, but they'll put your number on the track on those displays, and then on your wheel, you'll get a blue flag as well, and you can't ignore them for too long because you're impeding someone who's usually at the front end of the race and racing for points, while if you're a lap down, you're usually at the tail end of the points or more likely than not out of those top 10 points paying positions. The red flag means the session is suspended or stopped, and that usually means something horrible has happened or the weather's so bad something horrible could happen. And so that's when you get a red flag, people pull into the pits and get out of the cars. The black and white flag, not the checkered flag, is a warning for drivers that they've been reported for unsportsmanlike behavior, which can be followed by a black flag, which is you're done and disqualified. You return, you do not pass go or collect $200. You're done for the day. The black and white, though, is for driving standards or unsportsmanlike behavior. And the most common way people get the black and white flag is for track limits. You get a handful of warnings if you go over the white line on the track. And this is so complicated, we won't get into it. Not every track enforces it exactly the same. Certain corners are more important, and they will tell the drivers in advance, and the track limits have moved over the years. They move the outside of some of the tracks. Some tracks put gravel to make it penal so they don't have to watch. Austria, like 4 years ago, had 47,462 track limits. It was no fun for anybody, and so they're trying to find that. But if you get 3 track limits during the race, you get a black and white flag, and in one more, you get a 5-second penalty. So these things add up, and you want to watch. And the black and white flag, like I said, can lead to the black flag if you're disqualified.
And then we get the one, which I think I might be right in saying is the only one that has a nickname.
I think so.
we get the black and orange flag, which is affectionately known as the meatball flag. It's a black flag with an orange circle in the middle. You don't see it very often. It's for safety. It indicates that a driver has a mechanical problem with a car, or there's something loose or a leak, or something that the race director doesn't like the look of, and they want that car to head to the pits to allow the team to either retire the car or fix it if they can. I wish we saw it more, because even like Crofty would get excited when he gets to announce that the meatball flag is out. So
it felt like it was Kevin Magnussen getting it repeatedly. There was a point where Haas, and I think even his partner, I don't know if it was Nico at the time, I don't think it was, where his end plate, the front wing end plate, continually, every race would get dinged and be hanging on by a thread, and they'd have to throw the meatball flag out, because if that comes off, you don't want pieces of race cars on racetracks.
Did they do the meatball flag for, who was it who had their rear wing, the DRS fixed by duct tape?
Yuki had that.
Did they like that? Did they let them race with that?
I think they let them race and then gave them a big old penalty after the fact.
And then we get to the flag that you want to see first, and that's the checkered flag. It's the one where we get some random celebrity to come on and energetically wave the flag to welcome the winning driver home. As soon as you pass the checkered flag, your race is done, and it's the first. As soon as you see it, it's done. So if you've been lapped, if you're 1 or 2 or 3 laps down, once the leader crosses the line and gets the checkered flag, next time you come round, you're done. You don't, otherwise we'd have to sit there for an extra 10 minutes waiting for all the stragglers to come round and finish all their laps. It would get a little bit silly. So that's flags. So 2 sections left, Glossary, and then the 2025 lineup. So the Glossary, we have to start with this one, because this is where our name is born from. you will hear about, not just from us as a podcast, but you will hear sometimes on the commentary, and we will get excited about it, the dirty side of the track. Sometimes they don't say it properly and we don't get the full soundbite. But essentially, if you watch the racetrack over time, you will get a clear racing line where it's the fastest route around the circuit, and you'll get a nice clean line showing off. And all the bits of rubber that are coming off these tires that are degrading all the time, or any dust that was on the track, all gets blown off to the other side. That is known as the dirty side of the track. Probably going to have your grip reduced there. And if you want to, sometimes you'll hear them say that they're, if you're coming down to make an overtake and you go off the racing line, you're at risk of running into the next thing on our glossary, which is the marbles, which is the name they give the little bits of dirt on the dirty side of the track. So they can basically get in the way of, as Brian was talking about, you want to get as much contact between your tyre and the race surface as you can. And if you've got all these little tiny marbles in there, well, that ain't too good for grip, and it can have disastrous results if you try a move on the marbles.
We do love it, though, as Rob said, when it is mentioned the dirty side of the track. I think I have one of them here.
Dirty side of the track.
That was crafty. I just again, because there's so much context to it, I have to just grab the part that says those.
I think there was one once where he said, because Max tried to go around the outside of somebody, and the whole clip was something like Max Verstappen is on the dirty side of the track, and we tried to use that as he's our next guest.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we'll take anything. When we do the 100 seconds of DRS, even Martin wandering around.
You do wonder if DRS shouldn't be limited to, 100 seconds per race. Or...
Anything we can get, baby. All right, so then dirty air. You hear a lot about dirty air. And we've actually talked about it a little bit. It's when you follow behind the car in front of you. Effectively, if you think of, I'm going to really oversimplify this, F1 cars try to create as much downforce as possible. They are all about aerodynamics. Their wings, the shape of the body, the way that the driver's helmet sits within the cockpit, everything matters when it comes to aerodynamics. And the way that an airplane creates uplift or lift so that they can fly and stay afloat, F1 cars create downforce, and they don't want to be airborne. That's bad. When any of the wheels are off the track, big problems happen. So what that means is when you follow a car that has created its own downforce, its own sort of aerodynamic environment, there's wake, issues with the air behind it, and that dirty air can be hard to follow in. And before 2022, cars that would follow closely had to really eat their tires to stay in that dirty air and stay close to a car in front of them. When they changed it with the ground effect, that has allowed cars to follow closer without lunching their tires in the same way. So it's made it easier. There's less dirty air. It kicks it up higher, but it still exists. It's still a thing. And you'll still find teams kind of looking for that downforce, which is, as I kind of gave a little example, the wings create that downforce. There's sort of the grip that comes from it. There's mechanical grip and aerodynamic grip. Mechanical grip is what comes from the tires. Aerodynamic grip from the car, the wings, the front wing, the rear wing, even the way they shape the rear view mirrors, which I think are fairly pointless, but especially for Lance Stroll. Yeah, it's 2 jokes. And so, that's what you'll see. But it's a balancing act. As the more downforce you have, you're better on corners, but you're slower on the straights. And that, I'm going to steal one from later, is why DRS exists, the drag reduction system, when the wing opens on the back of the car on a straight. The wing provides downforce, which slows a car down inherently, but holds it onto the ground. Opening the wing allows the air to go through, lowers the downforce, you go faster in a straight line. And what's really cool, for me at least, is when you go to tracks that are very high speed and have very few low speed corners like Monza in Italy, they bring special wings, and the rear wings are so narrow and skinny that Kate Moss could slip through one of them.
They're like 10 credit cards, just like duct taped together and just laid
crazy.
across the back. They might as well just not run a wing.
You can't even read the sponsor logos on those things. They're pointing like straight up to the sky. But so that's the point of downforce. You want more. You always want, the right amount. You want some to stay on the ground. But at a slower tracks with low speed corners, more downforce is better.
Now we've got a run of a few that you'll quite often hear on radio messages. So let's start with the first one, box spots. Simple instruction to tell the driver they want them to come into the pit lane. I guess it's called that because the box that they pull into in their pit lane is known as the pit lane box. So it's box, in you come. And some of the conversations that I'll have with the drivers about why they want to come in, it might not just be about strategy, it might be in relation to the driver reporting something. You'll quite often hear, "Oh, I've got to come in. I've got blistering. I've got graining. I've got a flat spot." And I remember at the time when we first did this, we had to look into this. Like, I know of blistering, I know of graining, but I have no idea what the hell they are. So apparently, blistering is an imbalance of temperature within the tire, which can lead to the inner part of the tire becoming too hot compared to the outer surface, and then it blisters and pops through. And it can cause grip issues because now you've got little blisters all over your tire. Graining is the opposite of blistering. The outer layer of the tire heats up too quickly, and it essentially melts and like slides around over the surface and kind of sticks to itself and can create this uneven or grained surface. Think you can, if you're lucky or skilled enough, you can recover this and drive through it. You often hear somebody say, "Oh yeah, the graining. He's driven through the graining now, or he's driven through the blistering." So,
well, especially the graining because it's on the outside, right? So it's less inherent carcass damage to the tire. So you can kind of drive
use of carcass.
Yeah, I think that's a bonus point for me today. You can get that. You can drive through that literally by driving it off. The same way that the marbles are pieces of tire that have come off. You drive that, and it'll eventually come off through just regular use and degradation.
And what you can't really drive off very well, I don't believe, is a flat spot, especially if it's a big one. So this usually gives us the real nice slow-mo fancy replay when a car comes in too hot to a corner and one of the front tires locks up and it's static while everything else is spinning. We see white smoke coming out from underneath the tire, and then as they pull away, you can just see this disc shape every time the wheel rotates. You've just got this big flat area where they've just completely crucified the tire, and as well as impacting grip, apparently a really bad flat spot can set the balance off of the car as well. So now you've not even got something that you can maybe predict how it's going to pitch into the next set of corners. So a real bad flat spot is usually remediated by just popping in and getting another set of tires.
We already talked about tire degradation, and you may say, well, isn't that the same for everybody? No. Drivers actually get quite good at managing deg, and some people become tire whisperers. And then some, when they're getting ready to pit, they will put the hammer down. Lewis Hamilton, famous for having hammer time before a pit stop's coming up. Just get everything you can out of that tire. Every driver on the grid, and I never really appreciated this up until the last couple of years, every driver on the grid wants to come in for their pit stop with nothing left on their tires. They want to cook the living crap out of those things for the last few laps because they want to get every ounce of life out of those things. And it's a skill to manage your tires accordingly that is learned and you refine. And Oscar Piastri, who had an amazing 2024, is an amazing driver, talked about in 23, he had too much tire deg. He had to learn how to do this better, and it's become an art form for many drivers to manage their tire deg. So again, back to tires being interesting and exciting, you got to kind of figure out how you're going to manage them. But when you come in for your pit stop, you want nothing left on those tires at all. And there was actually, if you remember in NASCAR, Cole Trickle, he drove, he looked like Tom Cruise, but he wasn't. It was a driver named Cole Trickle in Days of Thunder, which is a documentary, I'm assuming. And he learned from his crew chief about tire deg. He said, you run them my way and you run them your way, and my way is going to be faster. It felt slower, but it was faster overall because he didn't have as much tire deg.
Wow. Check that documentary out. Now, when you come in for your, like Brian said, we come in for your pit stop and you're trying to wring everything out of it, they refer to that as the in-lap. So they'll say you need to maximize your in-lap, like Brian said, to just wring everything out of those tires as possible. And after the in-lap, and you've changed your tires, then you'll hear it referred to as the out-lap. And this is crucial because drivers here have to have a delicate balancing act of, you'll hear them getting the tires up to temperature. So see previous definitions of graining and blistering. You've got to get that tire into the right operating temperature window. But hold back on making sure you don't go out and absolutely cook them straight away. We've seen so many times where drivers emerge from the pits close to maybe somebody they're trying to follow, and they nail it trying to go after that person, and you're like, oh, this is amazing, he's going to get him, and then all of a sudden he's dropping away, and you're going, what happened? And you're, yeah,
quickly, and the rest of the stint on those tires stinks, and you don't often go back and say it was completely ruined on the first 3 laps, but it usually is completely ruined if you come out too fast. So I'm with you, the outlap, super important.
Oh man, here we go. Okay,
this is the hardest ones to explain because I'm not even sure can do this properly. We'll try.
Well, I took one offline. I should have done the credit for the website I took it from. But the undercut, okay, you'll hear this all the time. And you'll hear that the undercut is strong at this track. It's got nothing to do with popping underneath the car and slashing tires or messing with the floor or anything. It's if you can't overtake the car in front, you might want to make a pit stop before they do, and then go as fast as possible on your new tires
Without ruining them.
without ruining them. And then when they go in for their pit stop and come out, you will emerge in front of them, and that's called the undercut. Now, I did here get a definition. So let's say we got driver A and driver B battling out for P1. Driver A decides to pit first, sacrificing their track position to get a new set of tires. While they lose some time during the pit stop, they emerge on their faster rubber. Driver B is on his worn-out tires, trying to get as much as he can out of his extra lap. So while he's on his in-lap, trying to wring out whatever's left in those tires, driver A is on his fresh tires, absolutely leathering it. What that hopefully does is that offset allows driver A to catch up enough during that outlap that when driver B comes into the pits and exits, as he comes out, he sees driver A flying past and went, "Oh man, I got undercut."
Well done. Nailed it. Well, totally nailed it. It is exactly that. It's at what point are both cars that are racing, at what point is the degradation of time from the tires so much lower that a fresh set of tires gives you the advantage to pass effectively. So you make up the delta in time in that lap. So, for example, is your out lap on your fresh tires a second faster than the in lap on the old tires? And were you less than a second behind the car? Now you'll be in front. So that's the way I think of it. What's the delta from old to new, and is that delta enough to make up the position you were behind, like the space behind? You nailed it, because otherwise pit stops are the same for both, relatively.
Yeah, exactly.
The length of the pit is relatively the same. But again, the tracks with the higher degradation, so therefore the difference between the last lap on the old tires and the new lap on freshies is bigger. And so the undercut is stronger, therefore, on those tracks.
Yeah, and I was Googling kind of what are the characteristics of a track that make the undercut powerful. And you're absolutely right. It's the high deg tracks, but it's also then the length of the pit lane, because it can make the overall pit stop window. And like you say, it's the same for everybody, but you can have a pit stop window that the amount of time you lose coming in and out is like 18, 19 seconds. You can have others that are in like the 23, 24 type window based on the length of the pit lane. And if you've got a long pit lane on a high deg circuit, well, it actually means that the undercutter actually has longer amount of time on his fresh rubber to ease into that delta that you were talking about. So that's the characteristic of a good undercut, a powerful undercut track is high deg, long pit lane. Do you want to do the opposite now for us and take us through the overcuts?
I'll try, but it's really hard. But basically, it's the opposite. You stay out longer, right? You don't want to pit first. You want to pit second or later. Effectively, the overcut is less popular than the undercut because you need a track with really low tire deg, and you want track position as opposed to looking for that passing via the pit stop. And so Monaco, I guess, looks at overcuts. It's pretty rare, but effectively what we've seen, Monza last year is the best example of a perpetual overcut. What effectively happened is the Ferraris just stayed out. Everyone else pitted, and they stayed out for good. And they were going longer, so it was an overcut, but then they're like, forget it, we're going to the end. We're going to ride these tires till they fall off. And it worked, and they won. And that's very rare. And I think of that as, I know it's not an overcut, but that's why I said it's like the utmost example of what's related to an overcut is just hanging out there. So again, it's gambling that the pit stop isn't as valuable, that the undercut isn't there. You stay out longer. And sometimes you gamble on a safety car. Sometimes you gamble on a red flag. Sometimes you gamble on, well, just making it to the end on tires falling apart. So the biggest point is you really need low tire deg to make any chance of an overcut happening. And that's pretty rare the way the cars eat their tires most of these tracks we're at.
Then another instance of great slow-mo replay excitement is bottoming out, when the underside of the car makes contact with the track and we get all those massive sparks coming off and everybody thinks the car's broken if you haven't seen it before. There's basically a wooden plank, which I love the fact that in the high technology of F1 we have a wooden plank put to the underside of the car to make sure that they run at the right ride height, and at the end they measure the plank, and if you've worn away too much of the plank, that means you were running the car too low and you can get disqualified. But they have some titanium skid blocks in the plank to kind of prevent too much damage to the plank. And when that makes contact, titanium on a track surface, that's when we get all those sparks. What else we got? Back markers. I think we already covered that. If you hear that the leader is coming up to the back markers, that just means the slow ones at the back. Another element of kind of protecting tires and fuel is you might get heard, right? Okay, I think it was a couple of years ago, Lando, we need to lift and coast.
Right.
Lift and coast. Essentially means they lift off the throttle just before they head into the braking zone. Rather than like leathering it all the way up to the braking zone and then jumping from accelerator to brake and standing on the brakes, you essentially lift off a little bit and don't have either pedal, I assume, and just coast into the corner until you hit the braking point and then brake. So tiny little, I don't even know what it is. What do you reckon it is? A couple of 100 feet max?
Yeah, max. And I don't mean Verstappen. The thing I learned on my first ever track day when I went to a high performance driver's ed. It's not a race. Although I did a lot of overtaking, and I'm just going to say that's because I'm awesome. Nothing to do with all the horsepower in my car. And so I went out there, and I had an instructor for the first 20 minutes. I was there for like 6 hours. So for the first 20 minutes, I had an instructor, and he explained to me, you're either always on the gas or always on the brakes. You're never not using a pedal. And lift and coast is not using a pedal for a reason. As Rob said, you may be low on fuel, and so it's an opportunity to coast when you're not on the accelerator, you're not drinking fuel at a crazy rate. Or if your car is too hot, that's a common one. Williams in the first race last season, they got a new steering wheel, which had a monitor on it. For the first time ever, they got off the Wish.com steering wheels they'd been using, which didn't have any screens. And it said, car too hot. And so what that meant was they had to lift and coast, get out of the way, get out of the hot air of the car in front of them, get off the brakes, which were hot, the tires were hot, and let the car cool by lifting and coasting. And similarly, protecting tires. It's an opportunity for the tires to breathe a second where they're not either being, driven as hard as they can or using the brakes as hard as they can. So it's a chance for them to kind of take a break. No driver likes to hear lift and coast. Something has gone wrong with your race management at this point, and you're not gaining any time. If anything, you're just forced into defending.
Especially if they've gambled on a safety car where the fuel consumption will be lower and one hasn't come out, and they're now going. They're all kind of doing the mathematics in their garage, going, "Oh my gosh, we're going to run out of fuel." You must lift and coast to conserve fuel. But
brake bias is you can actually set during the race even how much brake force is between the front wheels and the back wheels. And there are times where, depending on the track characteristics, the temperature of your tires, the corner speeds, you may shift your brake bias up forward or backwards. It helps you with lockups and other issues. Lewis Hamilton, most famously in Baku a couple years ago, had a chance to win the race, and he'd put on what's called brake magic, at least they called it at Mercedes, which meant brake bias high to the front, and he just went sliding off at the first corner because he had no brakes on the rear, and he'd hit the brake bias way to the front accidentally and cost himself a race win, which was crazy. But that's how brake bias works. It is kind of fun to watch as they play with all these buttons and settings on their wheel. And
while they're doing 200 miles an hour.
Exactly. And my favorite example, also Baku, I think the next year, Fernando Alonso, who's a master of this art of managing cars and watching what's going on, he was coming down before the main straight, and he talked about changing his brake bias to +7, whatever the heck the Aston Martin setting is. I think it was 7, doesn't matter. He says, tell Lance that's what works for me. So the engineer gets on the horn to Lance Stroll. Lance Stroll must have changed his settings. The next thing you see, Lance going flying off the track in a cloud of smoke as he locked up. My favorite brake bias
trolling
story
ever
of all
from,
time. Both Baku. So anyway.
Yeah. I'm talking about grip and spinning off. So you'll hear the phrases green track and a track is rubbering in. And it's not as you might think. You might think the perfect racetrack is a brand new piece of perfectly laid pure asphalt.
Right.
And it's not. That is a green track. As race cars go over it, whether it's F1, whether it's the support races, a very thin film of rubber gets laid down on the racing line, and it's quite sticky and tacky, a little bit like glue. So now it increases the speed at which they can corner. So if we've either had it recently resurfaced or we've had a big downpour, you will always hear the commentary team saying, "Oh, yeah, we've got a bit of a green track at the minute, and we need to wait till it rubbers in," which is the rubber being laid down.
My favorite one was 2020. I think it was 2020 when Lewis won at Turkey and I think that clinched the title for him. Again, I'm really going on memory here, but they hadn't been to Istanbul Park for a while, And I'm fairly certain that after Friday, they were so shocked at how green the track was because it was new asphalt. No one had raced on it at all, no support races. I believe they had just locals running their cars on the track at night to get anything they could off of anything. I'm fairly certain this is true. And if it's not, just tell people it is. You're welcome.
They're talking about grip. Oversteer and understeer is something else you're going to hear. Steering isn't just steering. Depending on how they set up the car, again, where the brake bias might be towards the front or the back, what you can get is either a completely perfectly balanced car where everything nicely reacts to the steering wheel inputs, or you can get oversteer where the front wheels feel like they bite and get more grip quicker than the back wheels. So you'll get the nose of the car will really kind of like point in, and you'll get very, very front end sensitive car. I think they say that Max likes his car pointy. He likes the front end to be really, really reactive. The downside you have to that, if you don't have the skill to handle it, is that as that front kicks in quickly, the back end can not be catching up too quick and going, oh, what am I doing? I'm drifting all the way out here and I'm going to send you into a spin. So when you see a car spin out, that's quite often because they've oversteered and the back has kicked out. The opposite is true for understeer, which is where you turn the wheel and nothing happens because the back wheels seem to have the more grip and they're pushing the car forward and almost ignoring what the steering wheel is doing.
So oversteer, for everyone who's a car hobbyist who likes to go out and hoon around, drifting is oversteer. And so that's just simply what it is, where the rear end comes out, and if you can control it, good for you. Understeer, as Rob said, is really disappointing in a race car because you start to turn the wheel and it doesn't go where you want it to, and you're going further along, almost straight to some extent. The heavier the car, the more you'll see understeer, things like that. If you have a front-wheel drive car and you really hit it hard and race it a bunch, and I'm not talking about torque steer where you hit the gas and it goes its own direction. I mean when you're actually racing a front-wheel drive car, you more often will have understeer than oversteer in those scenarios. So I already mentioned the halo, but that is when you look.
Covered that.
Yeah, we can move on. The apex of a corner. And there's a good podcast called Missed Apex because the apex is very important and you don't want to miss it. It is literally the point if you're going, let's say, a left 90-degree turn. As you make that turn, you obviously want to get as much speed through that corner as possible. So you're going to go out wide to the right, start that left corner turn, and you're going to want to go out wide as you kind of get through the other corner. You don't want to scrub off a lot of speed. The point at which you actually take the corner, that is the apex. And you want to be as close to that apex, and again, they're usually not right angles, they're rounded corners, but you have to figure out where that apex is, and you want to kiss it with your inside tire as best you can. And so it's fun to watch, and when you miss it, you're going to have a slower corner because you're off the racing line. You will be scrubbing speed off either on the way in or the way out for having missed that apex.
Yeah, and you actually kind of hear the two kind of go together when we were just talking about understeer, is that you'll see someone come in and kind of go wide and completely miss the apex and end up going out to the outer side of the track, and they'll say, oh, you had horrible understeer going into that corner. So that's how all those kind of various pieces and parts come together. What else have we got in our glossary? We've got the formation lap, which is the one where everyone trundles round and does one full lap before they line up to get going. Basically allows enough time to get all the equipment off the grid. And I guess a kind of a little parade lap to wave at everybody where you go around. But
Yeah, warm up your tires a little bit.
Paddock, we've already talked about pits and pit stops, but you'll also hear the word paddock, and that's kind of the area that Brian and I were lucky enough to go to in Canada, which is the big kind of almost village behind the pit lane where you've got the team's motorhomes, storage, transportation, all that kind of good stuff. You'll see a lot of interviews being done back there, and where there are dedicated that we learned, like dedicated tents full of Pirelli tires being put on rims. The teams don't put them on their rims. They basically go to the Pirelli tent and they get their Pirelli tires put on their rims and take them back to their garages.
And if you're lucky enough to be staring into the Pirelli tent, and then you turn and you want to point to your friend Rob, look at the tires, and you put your arm out, sometimes you can punch a Ferrari mechanic in the face. And so then also, I did do that. That actually happened, and I felt horrible, and I apologize. I thought I was never going to be allowed at a race again.
That is the funniest thing I've ever seen.
Rob, look at the tire. Oh my God, I'm very sorry. Parc fermé, I already talked about that. That's when you cannot, it means closed park in French, but it's when you cannot make changes to the car, and that is after quali and before the race. And as we talked about with sprints, how that works, there are two safety cars. There's a virtual safety car and a regular full safety car. The VSC, or virtual safety car, is kind of like an automated system where there's something happening on the track that needs cleanup or attention, but it's not so bad that you can't be driving past it. And so they'll actually set a speed limit, slow you down, I think 40% of your top speed, and you have to stick within a delta from the car in front of you and behind you. So you're like, all right, I was a second behind max before. Now we're all at 40% reduced speed, and I have to stay a second behind max and within like a tiny little window. And it's a way that you get behind the safety car without the safety car coming out. You get to keep going around the track, but they can fix a problem under VSC without sending out the safety car. The best part, the reason why they do a VSC, is it's very easy to turn it off. They literally say VSC ending, and then you go back racing quickly, as opposed to waiting for the safety car to come around the track.
Yeah, and the safety car is the physical car, like Brian said. You've seen it. It's either the Aston or the, what was it, Mercedes?
Yep, either one of the two last year. Yep.
Either one of the two, and something really bad has happened. Car has broken down in a situation or crashed in an area that they can't get a marshal to wheel it back off there, or we got bits of broken car everywhere. Safety car will come out, and we've all used to see that. We're all used to seeing the image of safety cars there, and the line of cars all line up behind it, and we get the train of all the cars all in a row, all going round. And then here's where, with a VSC, there's probably not too much skill involved in a restart. It just goes, oh, green flag, racing,
just go.
off everybody goes. Safety cars, when they end, we all get told safety car is coming in this lap. And the safety car actually speeds up and pulls away from the train. And whoever's at the front, so let's say it's Lando at the front, he now becomes the kind of de facto safety car. He's leading the rest of the pack. Safety car peels off and goes into the pit lane. And racing does not commence until you go over the start line. So it's all on that first driver to say, when am I going to gun it and go? And some go super early, almost as soon as the safety car is peeled off, they'll just go. Others will just lead them all on a merry little dance. I'm going to go. No, I'm going to go. No, I'm going to go. And then they're gone. Some drivers are very, very good at this and have amazing restarts. Some have lost race leads and probably wins because they just have hosed it up completely, and someone's sort of second guessed it and caught them out. Usually what will happen if you can't get away at the beginning, you're normally putting yourself at risk of probably a first corner overtake because you didn't get away from the car behind. Exactly. He's sitting in your slipstream and boomski. And they have a huge impact. I think you talked about this, about strategy. Huge impact because certain racetracks, Monaco, Singapore, Spa, Canada, Jeddah, like when they're sitting down and coming up with the race strategy, they're going, okay, well, this strategy looks perfect. As long as there's no safety car. Well, for those tracks, they go, well, we have to actually assume there will be at least one. So if we were going to start off on hard tyres and go for a really long early stint, we want to do that if there's going to be a safety car probably within the first 5 laps, and everyone else is going to get a free pit stop, and we're toast on our hard tyres. So.
And what Rob just said is the whole point of the difference, right? There's 2 parts I think of. The VSC just neutralizes the race. However far behind the car in front of you were, you still are when the VSC is over. And however much lead you had over the car behind you, you have again when the VSC is over. It just neutralizes it, and then they turn it back on. The safety car, you get bunched back up behind the safety car. So any lead you had, gone. You could be 20 seconds ahead of the car behind you. Now they're right on your bumper. Welcome back to a new race. The second part, pit stops. Pit stops are super, super, super cheap under a safety car because everyone's going so slowly. You can pull in and pit and then get back out and lose very little track position, sometimes none, depending on how fast you get in when the safety car is called. It is a great opportunity for a cheap, as Rob said, cheap pit stop. The VSC is cheaper than a regular pit stop because cars' speeds are reduced, but you got to get it right because we've seen drivers come in. I want to say Max at Baku. Why is it all Baku today? I think he, in his run of 23, where he won 2023, where he won just about everything, he didn't win Baku. He came in for a VSC pit stop, and the VSC ended as he was coming into the pits, and everyone went around at full speed, and he got kind of screwed on the timing. But that's how it works, and so that is the second difference between the two I often think of. And again, the causes are a difference in severity, but the way you react to it can be totally different in how the rest of your race happens.
Yep. And then last one in the glossary we just added yesterday. I want to say, I think I got this right, that Jennifer Scott on Threads asked, I put out there, anything on the glossary you'd want added? And she came back and said, what's the cost cap? What's included? What's not? So last thing in the glossary, cost cap. introduced in 2021 to try and level the playing field so that you could apply a cap or a limit to a team's spending, so the big rich teams can't outspend the poorer teams. It was set at 135 million, I think, for 2023 through 2025, but with an allowance that they put in there that it could go up with inflation, or it could go up by 1.1 million for each race added above and beyond the 24. Well, we haven't gone beyond the 24, so they haven't increased that at the moment. It's the last year of the current cost cap, because in 2026 they'll increase it to 215 million.
I didn't know it was going up so high.
Yeah, because they're going to have to spend so much additional spend to adopt the new regulations. So there.
I did not know that.
Okay. Oh, well, there we go. So you've learned something. Shall I cover the what's covered and you can do the what's not?
Sure.
Okay, so what's in the cost cap? Every single car component, engine aside, from the steering wheel to the wheel nuts and everything in between. All the necessary elements required for operating the car, most teams' personnel salaries, garage equipment, spare parts, and transportation costs. All that added together is to come in under the 135 million.
And I'm fairly certain catering. Sorry, for anyone new, that's a Red Bull cost cap joke from a couple years ago. What's not included, and I didn't know this, so Rob, thank you for finding this info. Driver salaries not included in the cost cap. Compensation for the 3 highest paid staff members, I did know this because of Adrian Newey, car designer extraordinaire, and his massive salary not included. And team principals usually would fall in this category. Who knows? But compensation for the 3 highest paid staff members, travel expenses, marketing expenditures, property and legal costs, entry and license fees you have to pay to be a driver and a team on the grid. There's a fee that FIA requires. Activities unrelated to F1 or road cars, parental and sick leave payments, employee bonuses, and staff medical benefits are not included in the cost cap. And as Rob said, engines have their own cost cap, both to create and run and buy, because not everyone builds their own engines. There are actually, I think, 3 or 4. There are 4 engine suppliers, I said. I think Mercedes, Ferrari, Honda, and Renault makes the Alpine engine, or had, and they will, I think, one more year, and then they're done, if I remember that right. So,
well, we're going to find out right now.
Let's do it.
So last but not least, we've gone through all those terms and talked about all these various different things in Formula One, but who are we going to be watching on the grid in the 2025 season? So we will start in last year's World Championship descending order. So first off, McLaren, like Brian just said, powered by a Mercedes engine, so they don't need to pay the costs to design the engine. They're a customer team. They just buy it off Mercedes. They dominated the 80s and 90s. You know, you'll hear the name Senna, and they had a lot of success in the early 2000s. Lewis Hamilton won their last title in 2008.
His first, their last.
Yeah, his first, their last. Wow. And they've kind of been in the midfield ever since, really struggling until 2023, when all of a sudden they got a little bit feisty towards the end of the year, and so everyone said, this car looks pretty good. They doubled down on that last year. They got their first title for a gazillion years, and Norris pushed Max all the way. And I'd say they're probably amongst the favourites again for the constructors this year.
Another favourite is Ferrari, powered by a Ferrari engine, as you might expect. They've been there since the beginning, 1950, one of the original OG teams, and one of the most successful teams in history. They've had amazing, amazing drivers driving the prancing horse, but they haven't won a title since 2007, which hurts the fan base of Ferrari, known as Tifosi, which I'm sure in Italian means fan of Ferrari. I don't know. And they are one of the favorites. They do have a new driver pairing. There are only, I think, 2 teams with the same drivers from last year. I'm doing that by memory. But for Ferrari, it's Charles Leclerc, who's been there for a while, who, as Rob already talked about, the dog bowls. He has a dog named Leo, and he's a cute little dog. And then Lewis Hamilton, a 7-time champion, moving from Mercedes to Ferrari. Huge news all of last season, and he'll be there with his dog, Roscoe. I think he has another dog, too, but Roscoe's the one he always brings out in public. So those are the 2 drivers for Ferrari.
We didn't do the 2 drivers for McLaren, and they are yeah, it's okay. We jumped over it. So Lando and Oscar, same partnership now.
Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri, for people didn't know.
Yes, 3 years in a row, or 2 years.
2 years. It'll be the third year.
They've been together for 2 years, right? So next on down the grid is Red Bull, powered by Honda, and they're going to transition to their own engine supported by Ford in 2026, I believe. They only formed in 2005, and they've dominated since 2022. They got the current world champion in Max Verstappen, but they didn't get the constructors, as we said, and they're hitting a new lineup this year. So Max, as we mentioned earlier on, 4 in a row drivers champion, and he's going to have Liam Lawson sat alongside him for the first time. So no Checo. For a while, it's been Max and Checo, so now it's going to be interesting to see how Liam pans out.
It's going to be really fascinating to see the way they work together would be how Liam stands up and does. The next team, and probably of the top 4, I think it's fair to say that any of these 4 teams could win a race going into next season. Mercedes, powered by a Mercedes engine. Most successful team of the current era, especially this type turbo hybrid era. Lewis won them a ton of drivers' titles and constructors' titles. Interestingly, in 2016, Nico Rosberg won the drivers' title and then retired. But he did that in a Mercedes and beat Lewis. And everyone likes to point to the fact that Lewis once lost to someone in the same machinery, even though once out of a bazillion times. But anyway, and so they're about to start their post-Lewis era. And since the 2022 regs, they've had some inconsistent performances. We joke they don't really know their car as well as other teams after 8 years of being the constructor title in a row. So it's been kind of a shift in their fortunes the last handful of years, and they'll be helmed by George Russell and a rookie, Kimi Antonelli.
Yeah, be interesting to see how they pan out. I mean, they lost it really. In the first year of the new regs, they went with that 0 side pod design.
Yes.
And it just didn't work, and I think they've been playing catch up ever
A
since.
year and a
So
half
it'll
of
be
that.
interesting to see.
They kept sticking with it. It didn't work. And then when they shifted, they didn't. Way behind.
Then we get the team that we quite often joke that are in witness protection. And that joke, whenever we say witness protection on the pod, it means you just don't see them on the TV coverage because they're just so solidly in the middle and never really doing anything. Unless it's Lance crashing out, we just don't see Aston Martin very often because they've fallen a little bit. They're a new team with a long history. I think they were Jordan back in the 90s. Jordan of the 90s was sold to Midland, was sold to Spiker, and then sold again to Create Force India, but then went into administration, and they were bought by Racing Point, which was led by one Lawrence Stroll, who then rebranded it to Aston Martin. Yes. And rebranded it to Aston Martin in 2021. So, yeah, Lawrence Stroll owns the team. Lance Stroll drives for the team. They've now managed to get Adrian Newey's services secured for next year. They're powered by Mercedes, as we said, but they will be Honda powered.
And considered a works team, and I don't understand exactly how that works, but that's the way.
I don't. Yeah, I don't understand that either, really.
I mean, I read a whole article about it, and I came away still not understanding it. But so they'll be Honda powered in 26, considered a works team. And they have, sorry, Rob, I didn't mean to cut you. I just don't get it. But okay.
No. And they have, like we said, Lance Stroll, the owner's son, and old father time himself, Fernando Alonso, that was around in 1950 racing Fangio. Well, he's not quite that. Was he 40 now?
I think. 42.
He's 42. He's older than Lewis, isn't he?
Pull up the Google machine while I talk about Alpine.
Go on then.
So for years, Renault was on the grid, and they decided a couple years ago to promote their sister brand, a car called Alpine. Don't call it Alpine. If you're American, it's Alpine. It is powered by a Renault engine, but only to the end of 2025 as they're going to stop making their F1 engines and buy from Mercedes instead. We hinted at this earlier. The current car has an engine which most people would say doesn't have the top speed or the same level of power as the others. So I think they're really looking forward to getting rid of their own engine and obviously promoting Alpine. If you've ever seen an A110, that's their sports car they make. I saw my first one in my life when we were in Paris. I took a picture of it out the Uber window, and everyone's like, why, that car's ugly. It has big 4 lights at the front. I'm like, no, it's an Alpine A110. And then they're like, and no one got it. Anyway, so it's kind of complicated. As I said, Alpine launched, I think, in 21 or 22. But they were Renault before. Their current drivers for this year will be Pierre Gasly, who's been there for a couple years, and a rookie, Jack Doohan. And if I'm being totally honest with you guys, there's a lot of rumors that Jack's seat is a little hot because they signed a very popular test and reserve driver named Franco Colapinto away from Williams. So if you're keeping eyes on seats, watch for Jack's. Hopefully he does great.
Okay, so before we move over to Haas, we'll just say that I fired up the Google machine and Fernando Alonso is 43. He'll be 44 this year.
I said 2. I was closer than your 40. So
yeah, you were. Yep. Didn't I say is he in his 40s? No, I didn't.
Oh yeah, you probably did. So you're right. You win.
Yeah, I win that coveted trophy. Guessing Fernando Alonso's age. Then we get Haas, powered by a Ferrari. They're the first American constructor. Entered in 2016, and in 2021 they made a big decision because they kind of sucked. They didn't put any money into the 2021 car and put all their development into the 2022 car. They kind of been a back marker like forever, and then all of a sudden in 24 they just suddenly things started clicking. Whether it was getting rid of Gunther Steiner, the previous team principal, I don't know, something kind of just worked for them, and I would say they're a firm top of the midfield team now. Toyota are coming in and partnering with them, but it's a little bit loosey-goosey as to quite what that partnership means. It's not for engines at the moment, but who knows? And is this the first one we're going to run into that has a completely new driver lineup this season? I think everything else above, we've either had the two of the same or just one new driver.
I think we had both of the same, Aston and McLaren, and then everyone else has one holdover.
One,
right?
Yep. Whereas Haas have got a brand new lineup this year. Esteban Ocon has moved across from Alpine to partner rookie Oliver Behrman, who you might have heard of because he stepped in a couple of times. He's driven a Ferrari, and I think he did a Haas last year when K-Mag was suspended. But yeah, so we're going to have a rookie and a first timer. So they've got a complete clean slate this year with not really probably knowing what to expect from both drivers.
It will be fascinating. And in 26, they won't be the only American constructor on the grid when Andretti or Cadillac or whatever we're calling them joins. They'll be the second. The next team on the 25 grid is the Visa Cash App Racing Bulls F1 team. Similar to Red Bull, their sister team to Red Bull. They're powered by Honda. They used to be called Toro Rosso or Alpha Tauri, or as Rob joked earlier, Minardi. They've changed their name a bunch, but I believe they're Racing Bulls now formally for next year, which is exciting. It's still a little weird that this relationship exists between two totally different teams who race against each other, hypothetically. Yuki Tsunoda is the lead driver coming into the season at Racing Bulls. He's been in that seat for a while, the junior team, and been passed over many times for a chance to get up and race alongside Max. And he'll be partnered with rookie Isaac Hajar because Liam got promoted from that seat up to the Red Bull seat. And so Isaac will fill in alongside Yuki.
And then penultimate one for next year, Williams, powered by Mercedes. They were the main rival to McLaren in the 80s and 90s. I mean, I fell in love with the Nigel Mansell Williams. And they got 9 constructor championships over that period. Like Brian always said, Jacques Villeneuve was the last driver to win it in 97. So they're a team rich in history. It just all fell away, and they just haven't been competitive for years. But I think we had the year before last, they kind of started showing some signs of life. But then last year, they've not stunk it out, but they finished 9th. And it just, something isn't clicking there. Alex Albon is going to drive again for them. He's been there a few years, and he has a new partner now in Carlos Sainz, who's come across from Ferrari. And I think they've officially named the duo Carbon. Was that the winner on the Williams website?
Yeah, probably. And yanked the mic on Twitter. At some point, we may have said a midfield pairing. We meant midfield result with the car. Rob and I both think very highly of this driver pairing. So it'll be curious to see what they can do in the Williams machinery, but we both like both of those drivers.
Yep.
So if we said it incorrectly last week, Mike, you caught us. Sorry. But what we meant to say was great pairing, not the greatest machinery. What'll come of it? Maybe the midfield. And speaking of the midfield, at the very back, with a total of, I think, 4 points last season, which Max gets just by waking up most days, the Stake F1 team Kick Sauber. It's Ferrari-powered. This will be the Audi team going forward. Sauber itself has been kind of had different branding and partnerships. If you remember them a few years ago, they're Alfa Romeo. They were BMW Sauber a bazillion years ago, but last season they really stunk, and they got rid of both drivers, which was very painful because a friend of the pod, Valtteri, is no longer on the grid.
This is Valtteri Bottas, and you're listening to the dirty side of the track.
You may say, have you interviewed everyone? And we have, so just tune in every week. But so Sauber does not look to be good in 25. And they have 2 new drivers, Nico Hulkenberg, who was with Haas last year, first year with the team, and Gabriel Bortoleto, who's a rookie, joining the team, who's had good returns in his previous seasons. So we'll be looking to see how they do. I just want to say one thing. Rob highlighted this for Haas in 2021. Actually, 2 things. Back then, when the cost cap started, Haas was so small, they couldn't even spend up to the cap. And so now we believe with partnerships, sponsorships, they're able to do that. Every team we believe is able to spend up to the cap. But for the things that fall outside the cap, That's where a lot of the difference then can be made for highest paid this and investments in consultants there and things that aren't car related. So that's a big delta. 2, because of that, we may see teams like Sauber, and again, we don't know this yet because I don't think it's been announced, kind of cashing in the chips on 25 because 26 are new regulations. It's a clean slate. For people who are already at the back with a car that's already behind the other cars, how much money and time and effort would you put in? Or would you say, forget it, we're going to focus on 26 so we can get that kind of relaunch. We can get a fresh start, and we can be further up the midfield, if not competing, hopefully, for wins.
And maybe throw the whole season and finish last and get the most wind tunnel time for the new regs.
So it'll be a very interesting 25 season to see at what point do some of the back marker teams kind of throw in the chips and put everything towards 26. At all, early, who knows? That'll be another thing to watch in 2025.
It will. And that brings to an end our 2025 crash course into F1. I think now you're all armed to go to your local sports bar, and if they've got an F1 quiz night, you're just going to go and ace it because there's literally nothing that we didn't cover apart from the stuff we didn't cover. But it'd be interesting to see how much we screwed up and how much abuse we get for getting stuff wrong. But no, I enjoyed doing that. I enjoyed just revisiting all this again. There was actually quite a lot of delta from when we did it 3 years ago. So kind of starting to get a little bit excited now. We're kind of into the under 2 month countdown, I think, and or it might even be exactly 2 months today. I'm not sure, but we're getting close. The season will be here before we know it. We'll be getting livery launches. We'll be getting testing, and it'll all start building up before we know it. We'll have the first race at Australia.
Can't wait. One last piece of news that I forgot we didn't put up front, because I was about to say it's probably less than 2 months to Drive to Survive, which is typically mid-February, sometimes third week of February, and we'll see if that release schedule holds. That is usually helmed by Will Buxton, who has signed a contract to be an announcer for IndyCar, and we forgot to say that in the news, but we got it in right under the wire. Before the checkered flag came out on this episode. So with that, we will wish everyone all the best this week. We'll see you in 1 week's time, everybody.